Hello and welcome to this PowerDesigner demonstration. Today's topic is on using naming conventions. The concept of data governance is well understood by many data architects. Good data governance avoids many communication problems and helps streamline IT implementations. So today we'll discuss how PowerDesigner can be used to enforce governance in the modeling process. We'll explore the relationships between an object's name and its code, display options for name and code, files that govern name and code matching, as well as glossary-driven governance. So let's get started by looking at names and codes. Any object you can create in PowerDesigner has a name and a code field. A name is a business term that identifies something of interest to the business. Code is a technical term used by IT to identify artifacts that make up an IT system, like, let's say, database tables and views. PowerDesigner has property sheets, and property sheets can display name and code for a single object or for a list of objects. Here we can see a list of names and codes side by side in two columns in this grid control on the property sheet. Note that the name and code can have different cases. Also note that the current naming convention for code is to use an underscore character to denote a space between words. Most importantly, code is always used to define program code that gets generated out of PowerDesigner. On the Preview tab, we can see that this SQL preview is using code and not name for the DDL that we're looking at. By default, name and code are linked together for all new object creation. And next, let's take a look at how that actually works. Here's a PowerDesigner speed tip. When you select a tool from the toolbox, that tool is selected until you select another tool. But if you right-click the mouse button once, it'll deselect the tool for you and return you back to the selection arrow. Here we have a property sheet that defines a table. And let me call your attention to the equals button on the right side of both the name and code fields. Currently the code button is enabled. This links the name field with the code field. Anything I type in the name field will be reproduced in the code field. If I disable the linkage between name and code by selecting the equals button, then each field works independently and I can set a completely different name than code. If I re-enable the synchronization button, then it makes the name field and the code fields match. This is the default behavior whenever you create a new object in PowerDesigner. If you want to permanently disable this feature, you can go to the Tools menu and choose General Options and uncheck the name to code mirroring. An important note here, however, if you do disable the name to code mirroring, none of the stuff I'm about to show you will actually work. For the remainder of this demonstration, we will be working with the naming conventions dialog. As a matter of fact, you're going to see the naming conventions dialog quite a bit. This dialog controls how name and code work together. Sometimes the name will drive the code word that gets used, and sometimes the code will drive the name that gets used. To get there, you can right-click in the design area, and this will bring up a shortcut menu. Choose Model Options from the shortcut menu. Be careful not to click on an object. You must click on an open area. If you click on an object, you will not see Model Options available in the shortcut menu. The Model Options window has a number of different categories and subcategories on the left. Today we'll be working exclusively with the naming conventions category. Let's take a quick tour of this window. First, naming conventions can be applied globally or by a specific model object type. The subcategories apply to specific object types within a particular model type. We'll take a look at that in more detail later on in the demonstration, but for now, we'll concentrate on naming for all objects in a model. The first thing to note is the display options. You can display either the name or the code in the model. If I were a DBA, I might be interested in viewing, let's say, technical names, so then I might want to display by code. If I were maybe a data architect or somebody with a more business focus, I might be more interested in viewing by name. Here's a good PowerDesigner tip. If you are used to using a logical model and a physical model to display different names and codes, you can actually just have one physical model and toggle between name or code depending on the audience that you want to communicate with. This helps a lot with model management since you're only managing one model instead of two. Now across the top there are several tabs. There's a name tab and there's a code tab. The name and code tabs here let us set length as well as specific cases. We can use uppercase and lowercase. The code tab actually has an additional case called camel case that you can set. And you can also set what characters you might not want to allow in the naming. For instance, special purpose characters like